Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Shoot the Gap, the IDP Fantasy Football Show here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards. And tonight we welcome back the godfather of IDP himself, Mr. Gary Davenport, to the show to talk about some top tandem targets across the NFL at defensive lineman, linebacker, and defensive back positions for the 2023 IDP Fantasy Football season. All right, folks. Well, before we get started with tonight's show, please make sure to head over to our YouTube page and subscribe for more actionable fantasy football content and advice from topics ranging from Dynasty and Redraft to Best Ball. For those of you who are just tuning in, we just wrapped up our Best Ball being a 4 draft show just recently. So head over there and our YouTube page and check out that, as well as head over to fantasyandframes.com and read all of our articles from offense and IDP as well. No matter what the topic is, Fantasy and Frames got you covered. If you are on Twitter and you want to comment on the chat there, we can't see it. Blame Twitter. So head over to our YouTube channel, jump in our chat there at YouTube, and we will be answering your questions for all things IDP. Gary, sir, welcome back to the show. How you been, man?
Oh, getting busy. NFL draft is over. Fantasy draft season Dynasty draft season is already just in high gear. Before you know it, redraft season will be here. The Fantasy Football Expo is only, about 3 months away. The first ever Kings Classic IDP draft. You know, I love this time of year. I really do. By every February, by the time February rolls around, I'm like, oh, thank God the season's over. I need a break. By March 1st, I'm like, oh, my God, I'm bored. But once the NFL draft ends, then I know that we're fixing to get after it again, and I'm ready. Put me in, coach.
I saw somebody, I forget who it was, on Twitter post for people who are covering fantasy football. If you are getting burnt out, this is the time. The doldrums of the summer is the time to kind of get your last minute recharge. And to a degree, I agree with that. But it's for a lot of us, it's super exciting. I think there's a lot of us out there who, after the season ends, we take a little minute to recharge there, and then, like you said, after the draft, it's full go, full steam ahead. We know where players are going to be playing at this year. We know where the rookies are going to be playing at, and now it's just a matter of, okay, let's get through rookie mini camps. Okay, let's get to Scott Fishbowl season for those who are hardcore in the fantasy football community. Let's get into redraft season, and before you know it, training camp, and everyone's following their favorite beat reporter on on Twitter and every other social media platform there is.
Hey,
Speaking, go ahead.
OTAs are firing up in the next week or so. Everyone's going to be freaking out about so and so. Oh, did you see that pass route he ran in a helmet and shorts? Oh my God, he's going to be a top 15 guy this year. There's no doubt. I love this time. I love watching people lose their minds over every tiny little tidbit of information. And it's not like I don't do it too, but it's a great time of year because we're finally getting OTAs and everything going. But it's also a time of year to don't overreact. There will be plenty of time to overreact to stuff once we actually get to training camp and people start hitting one another, and then we get into the preseason and redraft season really gets going. But for right now, just enjoy as things get moving. Just enjoy the momentum. Enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. We got a comment here from Chevin over on Facebook. Gary and Jorge just wanted to say thanks for your IDP knowledge at the Expo 2 years ago. You spoke about the IDP group. It got me more into IDP, changed my home league for the better. That, I think, Gary, you and I could both agree, that is exactly what we are hoping to accomplish whenever when we decided, like, hey, let's go full into this IDP panel at the Expo. Let's make this happen. And to read something like that, that's what we want, right?
Oh yeah, and if you think that was something, this year is going to be interesting.
This year's going to be.
It's going to be something.
It's going to be amazing.
I don't know if it'll be. I don't know if it'll be good because I'm going to MC it, but it's going to be something. So don't miss it.
I hope you're wearing your hat, your fedora hat, your wingtip shoes again this year.
this year's Godfather outfit is last year was nothing. That was an appetizer. This year is the main course. I've been working on this for months. I'm still buying accessories and whatnot to make sure I have everything buttoned down. Yeah, I'm gonna be dressed well.
Well, damn it! Now I got to start planning that out myself. But we talk about all the stuff that's happening, around the league, all the things that will be happening. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot to cover, though, and you're a busy person. I feel like I turn on social media every single morning, and it's like, oh, there's something new from Gary, new from Gary, new from Gary. Maybe if you could tell everybody just currently what you've been working on lately.
Oh, I've got something at Bleacher Report popping tomorrow on some early predictions on training camp battles. Granted, that's just NFL centric, but it does mention, I believe, the linebacker situation in Kansas City and potentially the safety situation in Cincinnati. And I'll be writing a piece for Football Guys tomorrow that will probably be going live, if not this weekend, then on Monday, going over true position again, explaining it to me. But because with my fantasy league adopting it this year, there's still a fair amount of confusion about what exactly it is and what it means for IDP. I'm going to explain that again and tell managers how they can take advantage of it.
Nice. Love it. Love all the work, specifically over at Football Guys. Joe Bryant, huge fan, amazing guy. So definitely can't wait to check that out when that drops. Okay, so now that we covered the basics here and welcome the godfather of IDP back to the show, let's do what we always do here on Shoot the Gap, and let's do our Inside the Frames IDP question of the week. And so, Gary, I got a question for you. This year, in startup and in rookie drafts this season, which IDP position have you, more often than not, because there's always variation there, been targeting first, and why?
Oh, it's going to have to be the linebackers. If only because, and especially with true position becoming more and more prevalent, the depth at the linebacker position has come down a little bit. Those 3 down guys are becoming that much more valuable. It wasn't a great class at the position, rookie-wise. I mean, there's some talent. And there are some guys that I expect in a year or 2, or maybe 3. Excuse me, getting over a cold.
They're good.
Who I think will go on to be really good players. But, there's really only one linebacker this year that I trust with a fair amount of confidence to have a rookie impact, and that's Jack Campbell. So, yeah, I'm normally a guy that's going to go at linebacker first anyway. And I just feel like this year there's that much more impetus to do so.
Now, does that change now? I put out earlier last week a Twitter post, and I put it over on Instagram page talking about, balanced scoring, tackle heavy, big play scoring as kind of the 3 predominant scoring settings that people could then adjust and modify to fit the needs of their leagues or whatever they want to do with IDP. Does that change for you, Jack Campbell, as the first pick you're trying to go after? Does that person change depending on the scoring setting, or is it just one of those things where you're looking for the best value at any position at that point?
It would have to be awfully big play heavy for me to, because you look at the edge rusher class this year, it's pretty deep. I mean, there's quite a few guys. And granted, you're probably going to have to be a little more patient with those guys, but that's just the nature of the beast with edge rushing. You don't normally see a first-year guy come out and put up 10 or 11 sacks. It just doesn't happen. Even guys like, I think Myles Garrett had 7.5 sacks. But it's going to be linebacker 9 times out of 10, regardless of the scoring, just because the scarcity wheel has for so long, and it's going to take some acclimation for IDP managers, and I realize that for so long, the defensive line was the shallowest position. So you had to hammer that. You had to make sure you had at least that one reliable guy. I still think you want that one reliable guy. I really don't know that strategy has changed as much as some believe, but there's more depth. You can be a little more patient there. You want to make sure you've got that cadre of 3. You want to make sure you've got 2, 3, 4 linebackers on your roster that aren't leaving the field in sub package. Because that list of 85, 90, 95% snap count linebackers is not getting longer, it's getting shorter. So unless you want to have to roll out one of those 70% guys, hit that linebacker position.
That's a very good point. And we had John Macri from PFF on the show last week, and earlier in the week last week he dropped this heat map where he was talking about the utilization of teams that had 2 linebackers on the field at all times and the teams that had 3 linebackers on the field at all time. Coincidentally, more often than not, teams are rolling out 2 linebackers the majority of the time for defensive purposes. So like whether it's the true position changes that are happening this year or just the usage of the number of linebackers on the field at any given one time for a team, I can totally understand that argument in terms of, yes, you're decreasing the talent pool there. So no, that's a very good point.
I don't think there was a team in the NFL that ran base defense 40% of the time last year. Not one. And there were multiple teams that ran nickel or dime 80+%. I think the Browns were at like 84% nickel. That's Cleveland's defense. To say it's a 4-3 is just a misnomer. They run a 4-2-5 now. That's the base defense. That's the defense they're going to be in all the time. There are going to be 2 linebackers on the field. And more teams are doing that because, more and more teams are throwing the ball like crazy. So,
right.
If you can find 2 linebackers on a team that you can trust as relatively every down guys, that's great. There are some teams where anymore there's really only one, and then you have another guy who falls in that 70 to 75% range.
A la Bobby Wagner for the Rams last year, who basically was like their de facto linebacker in their defense, which I guess kind of makes Ernest Jones kind of somebody that a lot of people are looking at this year as somebody.
Ernest Jones is going to be the hype king of 2023. And that's going to be the problem with Ernest Jones. Everyone is already Ernest Jones, especially after the Rams didn't draft anyone, didn't really add to the linebacker core. Oh, my God, Ernest Jones is going to be a top 10 guy. And it's just going to drive – that's the problem. It's going to drive his ADP to the point where it's going to suck all the value out of him and murder our joy. So I wish people would just for a minute, just quiet.
So apologizing ahead of time. There may be an Ernest Jones article I'm dropping pretty soon to help the cause there, Gary, or to do the exact opposite, I guess. But you mentioned a few minutes ago linebackers that you could find on the field a majority of the time. And so let's get into this topic of tandems per position here at linebacker, defensive lineman, and defensive back. And let's kick it off with the linebacker position. We were talking behind the glass with Gator J, who, by the way, Gator Fantasy J77 on Twitter, one of the hardest working producers behind the scenes. There is a shout out to Gator J. We were talking about how when we were creating the graphic for this show, he had put on a pair of Buccaneers linebackers as the people to showcase. And I said, no, go Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw for the 49ers. But then, upon doing some research today, I'm like, I think I missed completely on a tandem that people should be paying attention to. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm not like in the know with people or just not really that connected anymore in certain circles. But why Alex Singleton and Josie Jewell I have not been crossing my timeline more often than not this offseason is kind of surprising to me. You look at Alex Singleton, 153 total tackles, averaging 9 a game. Josie Jewell, 127 total tackles, 9.8 a game. Alex Singleton had, I believe, a couple 20 total tackle performances last year, and he had more often than not double-digit games. Same thing goes for Josie Jewell. We look at MFL ADP currently, which it's mostly startup / rookie combos that are going on here. We are seeing Alex Singleton as the LB44. We're seeing Josie Jewell as the LB28. Am I crazy for saying, hey, this is for fantasy purposes? If I'm looking for tackles as like a base or a foundation for my assessing value, is this a tandem that people should be paying attention to more?
Oh, absolutely. They made my top 5 of IDP linebacker time, and it's not necessarily. If we're talking from an NFL perspective, give me Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw all day, every day. That's a whole different conversation. But Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton have both shown they can be ridiculously productive. I mean, Alex Singleton might make a tackle 3-4 yards down the field, but in IDP leagues, we don't care. It doesn't matter. And Josie Jewell, for a lot of last year, I mean, he had a little trouble staying on the field, but when he was out there, I mean, he was a top 5 guy a lot of times in fantasy points per game. So, yes. And the fact that they fly a little bit under the radar is an opportunity for value. Now, they did draft Drew Sanders, but I think it's probably, and I look at Sanders probably more as a threat to Singleton than Jewell. Jewell's actually an underrated talent. Singleton is ridiculously productive, but like I said, sometimes he tends to be ridiculously productive 3-4 yards down the field. Right. But Sanders is a kid that played all over the place at Arkansas. I mean, he was half an edge rusher. If he is going to transition full-time to off-ball inside linebacker, I think there's going to be a learning curve there. I think it's going to take him some time. So, no, I'm confident drafting Singleton and Jewell this year, and I hope that people do sleep on them a little bit and, go for those bigger names. I love Fred Warner. Fred Warner might be, from a talent perspective, the best off-ball linebacker in the NFL. I mean, you can make that argument. And I'm sure I have him in my top 10 in my IDP rankings. I'm probably over-ranking him because a lot of times his NFL impact just doesn't show up in the box score, and Greenlaw has a tendency to siphon some stats from him.
That's a very good point. And well, we'll get to that. We'll get to the 49ers linebacking duo in a second. Tease. What's a tandem that you're looking at this year, Gary?
I can't quit Shaquille Leonard. I just can't. The Indianapolis Colts. I mean, you look at what Zaire Franklin, Bobby Okereke's gone, so we don't have to worry about who's going to be the odd man out and who's going to lose out on sub package snaps, which last year when everyone was healthy was Okereke. He's in New York where he's going to clean up. So there's no reason why Leonard and Franklin won't both be every down linebackers. Granted, health is a huge question mark with Leonard. But if he's healthy, he's a top 5 guy. Franklin last year was a top 10 guy most of the season. And he's another guy that, he's not exactly a household name, even after what he was able to accomplish last year. I'm seeing him ranked a lot of times in the 15 to 20 range. If I can get him there in a fantasy draft, oh, absolutely. That's fantastic. If I can, get me a top 7 or 8 linebacker, hit the defensive line and get that one reliable every week guy that I want, and then circle back and be able to get a Zaire Franklin as my LB2, oh, I'm feeling good. I'm confident. I'm smiling.
Yeah, I wonder if this is a situation in Indianapolis, whether it's somebody who's been playing IDP for a while or somebody who's just into it, is looking for name value recognition, that they're going to go after Shaq Leonard just because of the reputation. And Zaire Franklin, they look at as somebody who's like, oh, he had a really, really good year. It's kind of an outlier, so to speak, but he just played so damn well. It's kind of hard to just ignore just how well he played last year. And given the fact that when and that's when given the starting opportunity. Now, going back to Shaquille Leonard for a second, we have not heard any news from him or about him this offseason, which is great. No news is great news when it comes to injury stuff. We haven't heard any lingering issues from last year. At least I haven't. Maybe that's not factual. But I can see where you're going with that there in terms of looking.
I have a few dynasty shares of Leonard.
Okay.
But given where I expect his redraft asking price to come in, probably not going to have a lot of the, because like you said, I think people are going to draft the name. And as much as I hope he becomes that unstoppable force that we saw early in his career, right, which if he does, he could be a league winner for people.
Right.
It's just the injury question. It's just too much for me to pay a top 10 price for a guy like that when there are other options around that are just give me similar upside with nowhere near that kind of risk.
switching to the San Francisco 49ers now, we talked about this just a few minutes ago. Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, comparable total tackle numbers last year. When we're looking at, tackles per game, Greenlaw actually had the edge, 8.5 to 7.7. We're looking at the ADP here in MFL, LB6 for Warner, LB18 for Greenlaw. Is Greenlaw at LB18, is that the right spot for him, or did he earn, whether it's earning, a higher ranking based off of his play? There's no Aziz Al-Shair anymore there to potentially split snaps with. Are people too low on Greenlaw, or is that about right, do you feel, for Dynasty and potentially for Redraft this year?
Mid-range LB2 feels pretty good for Greenlaw. I mean, I'd be comfortable. I'm more comfortable paying that price than I am paying top 10 for Warner. And again, I love Fred Warner as a talent. And I overrank him every year, and I'll wind up drafting him, and then I'll wind up regretting it because, you're paying that LB7 price tag, and you're going to get LB18 production. Whereas I think the inverse could be true with Greenlaw. You'll pay an LB18 price tag and get that LB7 numbers. So of the two, I think Greenlaw is absolutely the better value this year. He just is.
Let's go down to Carolina now. Let's go to Carolina. Let's talk about Shaq Thompson. Let's talk about Frankie Louvu here. Frankie Louvu just kind of made himself known in IDP circles out here. He's like, my name is Frankie Louvu. I'm about to help win you a fantasy championship in your IDP leagues. And he played phenomenally. MFL has him as the LB17. Shaq Thompson, a little bit older, but still dominating total tackles with 135 last year. But they were both, averaging mid-7 to close to 8 tackles a game. But Shaq Thompson, LB58, this is a situation where I feel you could, if you wanted to in your startup for dynasty purposes, let's just talk for dynasty, not get to redraft just yet. We're talking for dynasty purposes, you want to, people are obviously going to go and try and get the younger players here. But if you're targeting a position early in your drafts that is not linebacker, Shaq Thompson could be a value at this pick now, or is this kind of like a mirage here with Shaq Thompson?
Well, no, at that price, he's essentially free. You might as well throw the dart. I mean, what do you have to lose? The problem with the Carolina linebackers, and this includes Louvu, who I talked Louvu up last summer. I was a Frankie Louvu guy. I love me some Frankie Louvu. Almost got a Frankie Louvu tattoo. I didn't do it, but I thought about it. Carolina signed, 14 safeties in the offseason?
Pretty close.
And the question is, what are they going to do with all those safeties? Are they going to turn Jeremy Chin into a quasi linebacker, into a sub-package linebacker? What's that going to do to the sub-package snaps of Thompson and or Louvu? So there's uncertainty there with those Carolina linebackers, at least until we hopefully, and this will probably be something we won't see until we get into camp in earnest, have some kind of idea of what they're going to do with Chin and Von Bell and Xavier Woods. And then they went out and signed Rowe because they didn't have enough safeties yet. And are there any other free agent safeties out there still looking for work? Because Carolina might grab them too. So as much as I love what Frankie Louvu was able to do last year, he makes me a little nervous this summer.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. What's another tandem that is on your list there, Gary, for a linebacker?
You know what? Let's go with a new look linebacker core that was completely remodeled in the offseason. How about the Chicago Bears with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards? Honestly, of the two, I think the guy that I'm more interested in is probably Edwards. Edmonds got the monster contract. Edmonds is the name. Edmonds is going to carry the higher price tag. Edmonds is a wildly talented young player, but his numbers throughout his career in Buffalo were good, but not great. Right. I don't think he's ever had a 120 tackle season, which is not that high a bar for a linebacker to have to surpass. So if I can get Edwards as saying LB3/4, as opposed to I'm seeing Edmonds ranked in the top 15 in a lot of places, then that's where I'm going to go because we've seen some productivity, and I expect that Bears defense, the Bears are going to be better offensively this year if only because they can't be worse. But that Bears defense is probably still going to be on the field quite a bit. So I don't know that TJ Edwards is going to give us the numbers he did last year in Philadelphia, but I think he can still be a valuable IDP asset.
Let's talk a little rookie news here for Chicago. Noah Sewell coming out of Oregon. Basically, every scouting report you read about this guy is like, well, he can't do a lot of things in coverage, but you know what he can do? He can stop the run. He is a run-stopping linebacker. He will get those tackles. He will lay the lumber. Is this a player that maybe not this year, but maybe I don't know, next year could potentially challenge here Edmonds, or do you think the contract the Bears gave him is just a little bit too much for that to happen?
Edmonds isn't going anywhere. We'll see what happens with Edwards in a year. I mean, the guy we got to pour one out for is Jack Sanborn.
Right?
I mean, 6 months ago, Jack Sanborn was a toast ID. We were cheering. People were doing the Sanborn. They invented dance moves and named him after him. And then they signed Edwards, and it's like, oh, that doesn't help Sanborn's IDP value any. And then like 2 hours later, they give Tremaine Edmonds all the money ever, and yeah. Right now, I think Sanborn will probably be the Sam linebacker for him, but it's going to be a 2-down role, and it's just not, barring an injury, there's just not going to be much IDP value there. And that's kind of the role I see for Sewell too. He's a thumper. He's a base defense, run stuffing, like 245-pound, undersized defensive lineman to get in there and stop the run. And maybe you give him a year, he drops 10 pounds, hits the practice field, learns some coverage, and we're talking a different story a year from now. But right now, that'd be like a deep league rookie draft taxi squad dart throw kind of guy that you're just going to stash and hope.
Makes sense. So there are 2 more teams that I got to talk about, and one of which we kind of were talking about behind the scenes in the pre-show meeting here, only because our producer Gator J is a diehard Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan. So I preface this next, conversation topic that I don't know if I had called them a top linebacker tandem target, but Gator loves them so much, and I'm in a dream crushing mode right here. So I figure I would just talk about this now, and maybe you could help me crush some dreams as well there, Gary. Let's talk about Devin White. Let's talk about Lavonte David here, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both interestingly enough, both had 124 total tackles last year. Both were averaging 7.3 tackles a game. One is an LB9, of course, Devin White, and then LB45 for Lavonte David. Obviously, age is playing a huge factor in that in dynasty leagues and startups and whatnot. Is this a tandem that we should still be paying attention to, at least for this year? Or is this a tandem that maybe for redraft, you can make the case for prioritizing versus dynasty?
The problem is in redraft, White's price tag is probably not going to be much lower than that. He's going to check in the 8 to probably 14 range. And that's because 2-3 years ago, that 9-sack season where he was either the highest scoring linebacker or he's up there. He's like a top 3 season. Everyone still remembers that. And you just can't count on off-ball linebackers to throw up 9 sacks. It's just not going to happen every year. I'd be much more likely to go after Lavonte David if I can get him, in that 30 to 40 range as an LB3, maybe a guy that I'm not necessarily counting on as an every week starter, but as more of a flex or a bye week guy. I mean, Lavonte David he's not the player he used to be, but he's still a very good NFL football player. And he's probably going to go out there and get you, like you said, that 120, 125 tackles. I don't expect there to be a big drop off in his level of play this year. I was kind of sad to see him re-sign with the Buccaneers. I mean, I wasn't sad because it's good to see a player finish his career with the team he started it with. But he would have looked awfully good in the Cleveland Browns uniform, and we need linebacker help.
Well, speaking of linebacker help, I mean, with the news this offseason that Devin White apparently is wanting to get out of Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers, they brought on a rookie here, Servassier Dennis, I believe, out of Pittsburgh. And there have been some player comps to Devin White. Go figure, right? what do you know about Savase Dennis, and what do you think about him from a dynasty perspective? Is he like Noah Sewell, where he's a taxi squad player, or is there some real upside with this guy?
I'd rate him higher than Sewell. I think there's a little more future potential there. Like you said, it's going to be interesting to see with White, what the future holds and whether or not the Buccaneers kind of move on from here as soon as 2024. And I think there's a little more 3-down potential with Dennis. So I don't expect a dent this year. I don't think that Devin White's going to be traded. I think this year they're just going to just go play. And you know how it goes. For every player who says, I want traded, for every 10 players that say they want traded, there's 2 that actually get it. Right. So I don't know. I think it's going to be the status quo this year, but I do think you can see significant changes in that Tampa Bay linebacking core next year, especially if, you could see White and David gone. You could see David hang him up, and the Buccaneers just decide, fine, White, you want to move on? Move on.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's go now to another Bay in the NFL. Let's go to Green Bay. And so Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker. This is an interesting tandem for me. Coming out of the draft last year, one of the things when I was researching Quay Walker, in terms of his advanced metrics and stats, courtesy of the good people over at PFF and Pro Football Reference. Immediately, I thought this is the clone of Devondre Campbell. This is Devondre Campbell. He can play on the sideline. He can stop the run. He's a versatile linebacker. And I guess one of the concerns, people could have made last year is like, well, if they're the same type of, skill set player, are they going to cut into each other's production? And we saw here last year in terms of, overall numbers, Quay Walker, 119 total tackles, averaging 7 a game. Devondre Campbell missed some time, so that can make a lot, makes up for this 96 total tackle performance, 7.4 a game. If Aaron Rodgers was still the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, I know we're supposed to be talking defense here, but I would think that Aaron Rodgers makes any team more competitive. I would hope, right? If he was on this team, I would be very concerned that there could be some cutting into each other's playing time. However, I do not know what to think of Jordan Love. I guess we'll find out this year what he is. I don't think a lot of people can really say that they know per se, but I'm expecting them to be a lot less competitive than they would be if they had Aaron Rodgers. So maybe you're going to see Walker and Campbell have more opportunity to make more plays, some more opportunity to establish a higher tackle floor, because they may be on the field more often than not because their offense can't stay on the field. Is that logic flawed here, or do you actually see these people as a potential good tandem to use here for dynasty managers when they're drafting and or potentially in a redraft this year?
I expect Walker to take a step forward this year. And, it happens a lot of times with linebackers once they get a year of experience under their belt. And he played better down the stretch last year with the exception of a couple, we'll call them missteps. Yes. Mental mistakes. Whatever. It's all right. I don't judge. It's all right, Quay. The problem with Walker is that I'm far from alone in expecting him to take that step forward in his second season, and we're seeing that reflected in his asking price. So if you want to get a share of Quay Walker this year, you're probably going to have to pay pretty close to retail. Devondre Campbell, on the other hand, he's not getting any younger. Missed some time last year. Numbers were a little down. There could be some value there, especially if I hear good news out of training camp that sounds like he's 100% healthy. I don't necessarily believe that the Packers have any intention of a changing of the guard at inside linebacker this season. So from a redraft perspective, I would favor Campbell. From a dynasty perspective, I think Walker has a very bright future. He's an excellent player. He's going to be he could easily be a guy who we see putting up, top 10 numbers for 3-4 years in a row.
Before we, that's all I have for linebacker. Did you have any more, or should we go straight to defensive back after this, Gary?
What's good? Who doesn't enjoy talking about defensive backs? After all, it is the most important position in IDP, said no one ever. Let's do it.
In air quotes. Let's get into this. It's kind of hard to avoid the tackle production that these safeties here for the Arizona Cardinals have had the past few seasons. Jalen Thompson, I want to say a couple seasons ago, just came out of nowhere in terms of his 100+ tackle season, and everybody was like, "Whoa, this is an aberration." Well, guess what? He did it again. He's doing it again. He did it again last year. Had 109. Buda Baker, even though again we talked about this with Devin White.
I want traded.
He's not going anywhere. So 111 total last year. Both in terms of ranking here, DB17, DB20. This is kind of like a situation. I don't know if you can really go wrong here. I mean, if I was going to, nitpick here, I would say Baker the past couple seasons, towards the end of the season, has had a couple injury issues. And I know that's like, grasping at straws here, but you really can't go wrong with either of these people just because of their tackle floor. Would you agree there, Gary?
Yeah. I mean, I'm inclined to target Thompson, if only because Baker's a bigger name and he gets drafted earlier. And, Baker, he has that DB1 reputation, so people are taking him inside the top 10. Whereas Jalen Thompson, years ago, there was like a 4 or 5 year stretch where Jordan Poyer just could not. He was the Rodney Dangerfield of NFL defensive back. Could not get any respect. Would keep going out there and putting up like top 12 numbers, and every year he'd get drafted in the 20s by me. And then finally people realized, hey, Jordan Poyer has a tendency to tackle people a lot. Jalen Thompson has kind of that same vibe. He's a guy who winds up on a lot of my teams because I don't like to draft defensive backs early. And that's the kind of guy, I've filled out my linebackers. I'm liking how my defensive line looks. Everything's coming together. And I look at the available defensive backs and Jalen Thompson's there, pull the trigger.
I know we're going off topic here for a second. What's your favorite Rodney Dangerfield movie?
It's hard to go against Caddyshack.
Caddyshack is great. The first one I ever saw though was Ladybugs, which is kind of, which I still think is kind of funny, but you can't go wrong with Caddyshack. 100%.
Back to School is funny too, but that's a very 80s movie.
Yes,
I saw Back to School in the theater. That's how old I am. So.
Nice.
What was it? The triple Lindy, the dive that he does at the end?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the outdoor swimming pool. It was outdoor swimming pool, I think. Yeah. All right. So Arizona Cardinals, these two guys, Buda Baker, Jalen Thompson. Obviously you want to get these guys. These are a great tandem there. And Jalen Thompson, like you said, you could find value with him. What's a defensive back pair that you have that you're interested in terms of the?
It's hard not to like the Dallas Cowboys after what we saw last year out of J-Ron Curse and Donovan Wilson. I mean, and the Cowboys run a ton of 3 safety looks, and I do not expect that is going to change in 2022. And yet, when I look at DB rankings, Donovan Wilson is way lower than he ought to be. I guess people don't expect that he's going to be able to back last year's. I think he was DB7 in the scoring system that I use personally for my rankings.
Right.
If I can get a guy who finished 7th last year outside the top 20, I'm going for that. Curse, I think, is a nice value. Now, I'm not crazy about Malik Hooker, but it's not like the Cowboys did wonders to improve their off-ball linebacker situation. Now, granted, they drafted Overshown. It might take him a little while to get his sea leg and acclimate to the NFL. Leighton Vander Esch is not the guy he used to be. There are going to be opportunities for those safeties, and I think they're both excellent values in, honestly, both formats. See, there's really no difference for me between redraft and dynasty where defensive backs are concerned because they don't have shelf life. You never know. I mean, 1 year a defensive back could be great. Next year he could be just toast. So I don't spend any more draft capital on defensive backs in dynasty formats than I do in redraft. Turn them and burn them. Nice. They're good until they're not good, and then off to the waiver wire. It's not it's not them, it's me. It's not them, it's me.
Blame my team. My team has other needs that don't revolve.
Exactly. Sorry, the turf needs to see it. Bring your playbook.
Yeah, it's very good points there. You look at, for me, when I was trying to figure out, the tandems here to talk about, I too went with Dallas. And I was looking at strictly at box snaps. I wanted to know which of these, so for defensive backs in general, I like to look at box snaps. I like to see which ones are my de facto linebackers and who's going to give me a good, again, tackle for. And so you look at the box snaps. Donovan Wilson was the safety 7 in box snaps. Curse 21, but Curse missed some time. I think he only played 14 games, and Donovan Wilson played a full 17. They both were pretty high in defensive snaps versus the run. So yeah, in watching them last year, it was basically like watching clones of one another. Like they were both asked to do similar things. It wasn't just one was relegated to doing one thing, was the other. Like, no, 1 minute, one's creeping up close to the line of scrimmage and is blitzing. The other one drops back a little bit more, and then it switches. But the volume and production was just there. So I'm totally a fan of that one. All right, I got one. This is a reach. I fully say I admit that.
There's no such thing as a reach with defensive backs. So it's
give it a minute. Give it a minute. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Cameron Curl and Derek Forrest. I really like what I saw out of Derek Forrest last year down the stretch. Both of them coincidentally, 84 total tackles, 7 a game. 7 a game for Cameron Curl. Over the last 6 games of the season for Derek Forrest, he was averaging 6.3 tackles a game. In terms of box snaps, Cameron Curl was the safety 12. In that number, Derek Forrest was the safety 28. And Derek Forrest is somebody who didn't really get a lot of opportunity per se in terms of snap percentage early in the season, but we saw his performance just, improve down the stretch. And so this could be a situation here in Washington where you see some strength, at this safety tandem position. We talk about MFL rankings. Cameron Curl is there. Derek Forrest didn't even make the top 50. So it's almost like you're literally getting Derek Forrest for free. Yeah, he's playing free, but still the fact that, Washington is not afraid to use these players closer to the line of scrimmage interchangeably, regardless of the fact that they're labeled a strong safety or free safety or what even that means anymore. I don't know. I'm liking the fact that Curl is where he is, but I really like, especially for like flex weeks, for bye weeks situations. And we're talking like a really deep roster here. Derek Forrest could provide some really good upside for you, based off of what we saw towards the end of last season. All right, now that I gave you my Commanders, Derek Forrest, Cameron Curl thing.
I like quite a few of the Commanders, the linebackers and the safety. I think Jamin Davis is kind of undervalued this year. With Cole Holcomb gone, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Cody Barton in Washington. There could be some value to be had with the Commanders. I mean, obviously on that defensive line, you're paying retail, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, I'm sure. But those linebackers and defensive backs, there's value, sneaky value.
Absolutely. What about you? What about another defensive back pair before we switch over to a defensive lineman? What do you think here, Gary?
You know what? I'm going to stay away from Carolina and Seattle, if only because no one knows what's going to happen there. I do think there's going to be value. There's someone in that Carolina secondary and that Seattle secondary is going to go off this year. It's just, is it going to be Julian Love or Jeremy Chin or one of the other 38 safeties that the two teams have between them? Talk about the Chicago Bears. Now you're gonna have to pay up for Jaquan Brisker after the year he had.
Right.
He's not gonna come cheaply. But Eddie Jackson got hurt, a little older, but we've seen the kind of per game numbers that Eddie Jackson can put up. Has that nice big play tackle. It's got kind of that Kevin Byard vibe going on where some weeks he'll go out there and get you 8-9 stops. Some weeks he'll go out there and intercept a pass and force a fumble. And I don't think he's going to cost much this year. I think he's going to slide under the radar and be that kind of defensive back that you can wait to draft. And he's going to be sitting there and you can get him. And I think Brisker's going to be great. Brisker's probably going to be, in Dynasty, he's probably a top 5 guy, but I probably won't make it out of the top 10 in redraft. I assume he'll be the second rookie safety drafted after Petrie.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a second. In regards to Brisker, had a phenomenal year last year as a rookie. Had Sanborn and Nicholas Morrow remained the linebackers there, I'd been like, yeah, give me all the Jaquan Brisker. I mean, this linebacking core has a lot of holes in it, but we talked about it earlier, the additions of Edwards and Edmonds. Do you think that their opportunity on the field now is going to take away a little bit from Brisker's opportunity, or do you think that this, they're still going to pull him down close to the line of scrimmage just because that's just what his skill set necessitates?
It's very possible. I mean, I will have 0 redraft shares of Brisker this year, only because I don't draft top 10 defensive backs. And you just mentioned a good reason why not to. I mean, I think Brisker's 2022, that's his ceiling for 2023. And there's a good chance that he comes in below that. And the problem is people are going to draft him at that ceiling. And drafting at ceiling is not a good idea. It's a bad idea.
Right. No, good call. Before we head over to the defensive lineman, just remember, folks, if you like what you're listening to, you like what you've seen so far, again, head over to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified whenever Fantasy and Frames puts out awesome content, as well as remember to head over to fantasyandframes.com, where we cover a multitude of things fantasy football related, as well as have our individual rankings up as we speak. Okay, defensive lineman. I'm really looking forward, by the way, you talked about it earlier. I just wanted to plug it again. Your true position explanation article that's coming over on Football Guys. Can't wait to read that, because I feel like if all the positions that are being addressed, we talked about linebacker becoming shallower. Well, now we're switching things up. Where now defensive linemen are getting a little bump in terms of the number of players that are going to be shifting over to that.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's very interesting how whether or not we're going to see more tandems as the years go on pop up here. But let's get to one. Let me kick us off here. Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. We talk about Micah Parsons. There's a lot of news going around that he could be making the permanent switch to defensive end, and I don't know if that's been cemented as we speak, but there's been a lot of talk about that. I think he's mentioned that.
At my fantasy league, he's classified as a defensive end. He's one of those guys, and it's a bit of a judgment call on my part, and I will admit that. He's one of those, he's like Von Miller and Hassan Reddick. If you want to call him a 4-3 outside linebacker, that's fine. Whatever. Maybe they are. They're edge rushers. So as an edge rusher, he should be classified as a defensive end. So at my fantasy league, he absolutely is.
Nice. And folks, for those sleeper people out there on Sleeper app, yeah, make him defensive line. So he had 90 total pressures last year, 13 and a half sacks, had a great tackle floor. Now, I don't know whether that's because where he was playing at edge, he just happened to be at the right place at the right time, or whether when he was switching between off ball and edge, he accumulated his tackles more so that way. Regardless, he had 65 total tackles last year. His counterpart, people are getting so hung up on Micah Parsons. Let's not forget DeMarcus Lawrence is kind of quietly a value there too. He had 55 pressures, 6 sacks. Again, the tackle numbers were there with 65 total. If you're not paying top dollar for Micah Parsons, there's something to be said for picking the other guy who's not being who's not being targeted, so to speak, by the offensive linemen who are blocking Micah Parsons and going over on the other side of getting DeMarcus Lawrence. Do you think? Now, I say this, and for again, depending on your scoring settings for big play, I totally agreed. I stand by what I say with DeMarcus Lawrence. For tackle heavy, I don't know whether that 65 total tackles is an anomaly or not. For balanced scoring, here's where it gets kind of tricky for me. If we're looking at DeMarcus Lawrence, is he productive enough in the pressures department to warrant considering him a value? You know what I mean?
I don't. It depends where I can get him. If I can get him, say 15-20 range on the defensive line, if I can get him as my second starter, and I've got a solid linebacker core, I expect DeMarcus Lawrence to be a relatively consistent player, and I wouldn't have a problem taking him there. I mean, he's not a guy that I want to anchor my defensive line, but as a second starter, yeah. And he doesn't have a great floor. And that's the thing. And it's another thing we're going to have to become accustomed to with true position. If you want floor with your guys, then you're probably going to want to lean towards those 3-4 rush linebackers. They tend to put up better tackle numbers. If you're willing to go a little ceiling, no, I have no trouble rostering Lawrence. Let's say Lawrence is coming off as DL 17 or 18, which is where I think I have him ranked. I draft him there.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's go to another team here, and I'll let you pick the team here. And I'm kind of anticipating a homer conversation we're about to have, but I could be completely wrong. So let's.
There are a couple other teams on my list, but since you mentioned it, I guess I might as well. The Cleveland Browns. We already knew that Myles Garrett is the best edge rusher in the NFL. Yes, I said it. That's right. I said it. And I was kind of excited about Okoronkwo's prospects.
Yeah.
And in 2023, given what he was able to do down the stretch last year with the Houston Texans and playing opposite a talent of Garrett's stature. But no, the Browns were done. They went and got Zadarius Smith, who is Jadeveon Clowney is a really good football player, or was a really good. He's still a really good football player. Zadarius Smith is the best pass rusher that Garrett has ever played opposite. It's going to create, plus they added Dalvin Tomlinson at defensive tackle. This is going to create problems for opposing offenses. So granted, if you want Garrett, it's going to cost you. There's one, I can't imagine there are 3 defensive linemen who will come off the board ahead of Myles Garrett, maybe 2.
Right.
But Zadarius Smith is a guy that you can probably get maybe even in the 20s, who I think he had, 11.5 sacks last year with the Minnesota Vikings. Injuries have been a bit of an issue. He's the wrong side of 30, but there is value there with Zadarius Smith in 2023.
It's almost like whenever I would watch the Vikings in prime time, there would always be like a negative comment or something regarding Zadarius Smith. So my perception of Zadarius Smith last year was like, oh, well, he's on the decline. But then looking at his numbers, he had more pressures than than Myles Garrett. He had 10 sacks. I mean, his tackle numbers weren't high as Garrett. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm literally driving up to Pennsylvania to go visit some relatives, and I had just gotten OGOK, or Okoronkwo as we dub him, OGOK. Nate came up with that, Nate Markham. And I just got him, and I'm like, yes, I don't know why nobody had him on their team, but I'm taking him now. And then the Zadarius Smith news happens, and the rest is history.
I had just finished submitting defensive lineman rankings. I mean, I was like, click. Okay, that's done. I'm sifting through NBC Sports Edge, checking the news. I'm like, okay, it's not done. You got to go back through, take that out, drop that guy, move that guy up here. I know that like Mike Wohler, I think he has Zadarius Smith 11th among defensive linemen in his rankings. So I don't know if I'd go that far, but it was an interesting move by the Browns, and I'm not complaining.
I mean, it's one of those things where I could definitely see a situation where landing spot for a veteran pass rusher with the skill set of Zadarius Smith can cause somebody to bump him up one's rankings just because you're playing opposite Myles Garrett.
Right. He's not going to get double teamed. That's for sure.
Exactly. All right. Let's go to another team here. I'm going to kind of go out of order of what I wrote down in our show sheet here, behind the glass peek here. I'm going to go with a tandem that coincidentally, according to PFF, was actually better at stopping the run than over the course of the season than rushing the passer, but they're still good at what they do. I'm talking about Cameron Jordan, and I'm talking about Carl Granderson. We look down the stretch from weeks 11 through 18. It was Granderson who was leading the Saints edge rushing group with 19 total pressures. Cameron Jordan right behind him with 13. It was Granderson who got the 6 or so sacks compared to Jordan's 2. And they didn't address edge in the draft. Was it Brise, who's the defensive tackle, I believe?
Right.
Yeah, they drafted there. They got rid of Marcus Davenport, which thank God that experiment in New Orleans is finally over because that needed to be ended a long time ago. No disrespect, even though that was
no, he's Minnesota's problem now.
So I could definitely see the situation where it's probably not unknown that yes, Cameron Jordan's getting up there in age, and he's probably seen his better days, or his better days are behind him. But name value, again, reputation. People could say, well, his 8.5 sacks and his 66 total tackles last year warrant me as having him as a low end deal 2 or deal 3, depending on your league and the scoring type that you have him in. But Carl Granderson, though, don't get me wrong, on fantasy Twitter, on the IDP fantasy Twitter streets, you hear some things and you're seeing Granderson's name pop up here and there, and it has been popping up consistently, although not as a lot, but consistently through the offseason. I'm curious what your thoughts are on Carl Granderson for Dynasty as well as Redraft. Is this somebody that maybe – is this a situation where you see Carl Granderson in your queue and you're like, I may actually pay up for Granderson because I don't want him to get away because I'm scared somebody may catch on. What I'm catching on is that he has real upside here.
I don't know that I'm going to pay up, but that upside, like he's the kind of candidate where you're like, is this the year that the light bulb comes on? And apparently the Saints still have a fair amount of confidence in Cameron Jordan, because I read today or yesterday, they're talking about signing him to an extension.
Wow.
And Jordan is a guy who has been underrated in IDP leagues for years. He just kept going, would keep going out and putting up 50, 55 tackles, 10, 12 sacks, finishing 8th or 9th among defensive linemen. And yet every year he'd get drafted 15th. So I hope Cameron Jordan does get him another sack of money. But yeah, I agree. Granderson is a very intriguing, little bit later target that you can, one of those guys that you're hoping you can sneak past everyone, because you never know when the light bulb moment was coming on. And he looked really good last year. Honestly, he did. There's a reason why the Saints were comfortable letting Davenport go out the door. And it wasn't just that he was awful last year. What do you have? Half a sack.
Wow, I didn't even realize he had. I didn't realize he had that.
I'm pretty sure it was half a sack.
That is, like you said, your problem, Minnesota. Okay, let's hammer home at least one more team here for tandem defensive linemen here that people should be paying attention to this year. Who do you got for us, Gary?
Oh, you know what? As much as Pittsburgh's too obvious.
Sure.
The Eagles are just loaded on them. The Eagles, you can't really say a tandem. It's more like a quintet. I'm going to go with the Washington Commanders. I still believe in Chase Young.
I'm not going to say that your Ohio bias may be coming into play here. And that's
maybe a little.
That's me. And I'm sorry. I sorry for that. Please continue.
But the fact that they declined that 5th-year option should be a motivating factor. And he has the advantage of playing on a loaded defensive front that features, 2 defensive tackles who are getting all the money ever. Montez Sweat is probably looking at a big payday. So if Young can't get it done this year, then he's probably not going to get it done. I'm hopeful that the Chase Young we saw last year was a guy that was still recovering from the ACL tear and just wasn't physically right, that we are able in 2023 to see the Chase Young more of what we saw as a rookie when he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Again, numbers weren't great. I think he had 7.5 or 8.5 sacks, but rookie edge rushers don't generally go crazy. And given where you can get him in drafts now, people have soured on Chase Young after last year's mess. 2 years ago was bad enough. And then last year was worse. So you know how fantasy managers get. They're like, that's it. I'm not drafting Chase Young anymore. You can't sucker me into it. He's off my board. He's dead to me. I'm seeing him in the 30s. And that kind of upside in the 30s, you just don't have anything to lose by making that pick. If it does turn out he's washed, oh no, you're 38 defensive linemen off the board didn't pan out. If he turns back into anything resembling the guy we thought he was going to be coming out of Ohio State, then you got great value. So part faith in his talent, part faith that the knee is healthy again, and part, again, it helps to play on a line with Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, and Montez Sweat.
Right. So I have thoughts. I have thoughts about the situation in Washington. And one train of thought is, you mentioned back to his rookie year where the numbers weren't great, but we weren't expecting that from a rookie. What really, for me, really impressed me with Chase Young his rookie year is how much he made everybody else better around him. How the attention that he was demanding, helped elevate Montez Sweat, helped, take some pressure off of the interior defensive tackles. And then of course we saw the following year off to a slow start, then tore his ACL versus Tampa Bay. Last year, as a Washington fan, listening to the local media, listening to the Ron Rivera press conferences on Wednesday, it's like, oh yeah, he's a week away. 10, 12, whatever, how many weeks it was later, he finally was ready to go. I can see the productivity being there though for Chase Young, just because I think this time away and having to kind of like deal with being the most prominent edge rusher on that team, referring of course to Miles Sweat, has kind of elevated his game, where now people may be paying more attention to him and less to Chase Young. And therefore that gives Chase Young more one-on-one opportunities, less double teams that he has to fight off versus what he had to deal with his rookie year. So I could definitely see that. And where you're seeing him going, we're talking dart throws anyway at a certain point, right? So why not invest in somebody who has that pedigree, who has shown glimpses of that, and quite frankly has, $70+ million motivations, different things of motivation to dollars of motivation to keep him going.
He's
so
an otherworldly talent. I mean, at Ohio State, there were, and yes, I'm an Ohio State slappy, but there were people when Chase Young was at Ohio State saying that he was better than Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa. And it wasn't like when people were saying that everyone was like, have you lost your mind? I'm just the bend and the speed off the edge. And he just needs to get that back. And if he can, on a line that features, you got two defensive tackles who've shown they can put up double-digit sacks. You got Montez Sweat, who has turned into a real threat off the edge. Right. You get all four of those guys firing on all cylinders, that Commanders' defensive line, I'm not going to say it'll be as good as Philly's defensive line, because 70 sacks is a lot to get in the season. But it can threaten. It can be that kind of just terrorizing force against opponents.
Hey, as a Commanders fan, I hope you're 100% right. And for dynasty value, I could here's the thing for dynasty for Chase Young, like you probably can get him really cheap. The asking price is probably not going to be exorbitant. Nobody's going to be asking you for chances are not nobody's going to. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, right? He's attainable, and for redraft, he's going to be attainable. So, I hope you're right, man. But for what you're giving up to get him, for the upside that you could potentially have, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Kind of what you're kind of alluding to there. Well, that's going to wrap us up here, Gary. Sorry we went over an hour just a little bit. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming back on Shoot the Gap. We got to get you on closer to the season. We'll definitely be seeing each other at the Fantasy Football Expo, as well as the Kings Classic Dick Butkus Division IDP League. We talked about what you're currently working on. We talked about what you got going on in the next couple of days. What other things down the pipeline do you have going on for the rest of the summer as we head into?
I think my favorite project this summer is back in, I believe it was 2013. I did a 10 or 12 part series at Fantasy Sharks, IDP 101. Just a complete treatise on how to play IDP, from the most basic of concepts to I got into stack crews and different schemes, and a lot has changed in the NFL and IDP in the decade that has passed. So this summer, John Norton and I, Football Guys, are going to revisit that with the Guru and the Godfather's complete guide to dominating IDP.
That's awesome.
I will be writing the first chapter of that up probably the first part of next week. You want to run a chapter or two a week right up through, into June, into July. We're hopefully right about the time we hit that first part of August and redraft season just kicks into high gear. People will have a complete syllabus of how to destroy their opponents at IDP.
Gary, once that thing is ready, I will be putting that advertisement on the Fantasy and Frames page. I will promote the hell out of that because that is perfect. There, one of the biggest complaints I think I have in IDP circles is that there's just so much confusion as far as like what to do. Like, what do I do? Like, if you're new to IDP, it's very hard sometimes. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I've heard some complaints sometimes where it's like, I don't know where to start. So having something like what you just described is the perfect reference, perfect tool for anybody to have. I cannot wait to sit down there and read it. And I would love to help promote that stuff for you. So that sounds fantastic, man. But I really want to appreciate you coming on the show. I know Nate and Hollywood, they didn't get a chance this week. They miss you. We all appreciate all the work you do in the IDP circle. So thank you very much for your time. Gator J behind the glass, thank you very much for producing the show. Much love there. And folks, again, remember, head over to fantasyandframes.com, check out our rankings, check out our articles, head over to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Really hope you enjoyed our content tonight, as well as follow us all over on social media. And we really appreciate your patronage. And for Gary, I'm Jorge. Folks, we'll see you on Shoot the Gap next week.